I think I'll just give you a brief overview
Sprint race.
My involvement in motorsport, and started in 1978, and I guess I put the cart before the horse because I actually ended up with although I was always aspiring to go motor racing, but budget restraints actually were pretty much the call of the day, where you go racing on your housekeeping budget. But as it turned out, I'd done some work for a guy who owned a Lotus Elan, and I'd undertaken quite a lot of work on the car, and as it turned out, he didn't have the money to pay me at the time, and he said, "I've got a spare engine for this thing, would you be interested in getting your hands on it?" So of course I was interested, and as it turned out, the engine happened to be a Lotus BRM engine. Now, for you guys who are historic racers, that is quite an interesting piece, because it actually is the big valve engine that had gone through the BRM factory, and it was an engine that produced, I believe, in the vicinity of 120 horsepower, whereas the old 1560 Lotus engine made 105 horsepower. So here I sat with a beautiful piece in my garage, and night after night I looked at it and I thought, what on earth am I going to do with this damn thing? And I'm dead keen to go motor racing, and I was working in Kempton Park at the time, and I used to travel back from my offices and come through Klopper Park, and Klopper Park is pretty much like Spanner Valley. You guys in Brakpan know what Spanner Valley is. Everybody's got a car quad blocks, and they're working on these things. So one evening I'm traveling home, and I look down this guy's driveway and I see an Anglia standing there. Okay? So I do the same route the following evening, and as it turns out, I have a closer look, and I stop and have a closer look. And this oak is using this thing as a coal bin, okay? So I pluck up the courage, and I fend off all these bloody pavement special dogs and all the rest, and others, because these guys have all got those kind of dogs looking after their face. And I go knock on the door, so I said, "Evening, sir." I said, I'm actually interested in that over there. What I want to buy it. What do you want for it? So he said, £5 a bag. So I said, no, I'm not interested in the coal in the car, I'm actually interested in the car. So, cut a long story short, so we eventually clear out the coal, and I get this Anglia body back there, and it wasn't long that I thrown constant 315 suspension in the thing, and got all the gearbox and bits and pieces, panel beaten out, some wheel arches, got some imitation moments. Anyway, I was up and racing, and it was a hell of a constant 315 brakes worked beautifully on the car, and it was an awesome start to my racing career. I actually remember sleeping at Kyle Lobby the first night, outside under the stars. It was just like, this is so awesome. I didn't sleep, in fact, I was awake the whole night. And I know you guys have timed things where you go racing, you break out. Well, I broke out in sweat the whole night, so there we were. Next morning, Castro Clubman's at about, I don't know, 6 o'clock in the morning. We were like, you were punched out very early in the morning. Anyway, it was an amazing experience, and the excitement was overwhelming. And as it turned out, Mike Rowe was the handicapper at the time. You guys may remember it. But I thought to myself, I'm just going to take it easy, because I still got to get used to all this. So I take it hell of it easy. In the meantime, he looks at the lap times and puts you in a handicap position. So as it turns out, on the day, I ended up winning my first race. And I tell you what, I was like, this is it. I'm on my way to stardom. Like, you cannot believe. And so, but at prize giving, he said, I'm watching you guys with sandbagging. So that was pretty much how I got going in Castro Clubman's at that time. And I was working for a bearing company, and my boss heard that I was in racing, and he came to me and he said to me, what are you driving? So I said, I've got this Lotus Anglia. He was immensely impressed, and he said to me, well, maybe I'll look at some kind of sponsorship. So I said, please. My first sponsorship was £100. And I'll tell you something, I was overwhelmed at this, because now I'm sponsored. And I said, but one additional thing, are you prepared to paint your name on the side of the car? Because that was the big thing, you had to have a sponsor with the name. So that's where we got going. That was in 1978. So I raced the Anglia through 78, and it was the most amazing and rewarding thing to race the car, because it was ultra reliable, it was pretty quick, and what you gauged yourself against was the guys that were in the same handicap bracket as you. So it was actually, I enjoyed it immensely. and we were racing, as I said, on sort of the housekeeping kind of budget. So I get halfway through 79, and somebody happens to look at this car and understands that there's a really very, very valuable engine under the bottom. Okay? So I made this offer of to buy the car, but in fact, in retrospect, the guy was actually looking just to get his hands on the engine. And when I did the numbers, I worked out that if I actually sold the Anglia, I could build and buy another car with a Kent engine and race for, in my mind, I thought 10 years because I was getting all this money. So that's what I did. And cut a hell of a long story short, so I built an Escort, and I raced the Escort going into 79, 80, and I ended up winning Castrol Clubman's Championship in 1980 thereabout. At the same time, Jody Scheckter wins the World Championship with Ferrari, and I thought I'm definitely going to get a call from Luca de Montezemolo. He's going to identify me as the next Formula. It didn't come in any case, so, but be that as it may. So I had won the Castrol Clubman's Championship, and I believed that it was time to move on, because I think if you've achieved something, it's time to move on. So I ended up buying an Escort 1100, which I bought from Colin Clay. Some of you guys may know him. And he had moved into, he was going into building a Datsun, the age-old Challenger Ford, and Datsun was there with a couple of Renaults thrown in. There were some Minis, and we raced against the Minis that time. Quite an interesting thing that the 1100 Escort at that time, we were racing the old circuit, and the 1100 Escort used to rev into 9.2. The whole season, I actually don't remember even opening up the engine. So that was in the years of 80, there about 80, 81, and we were star modified at the time. I achieved some success with that car. In fact, I ended up winning that class with that car. And the following year, the pressure was on, that was class F, the pressure was on to go and take on the 140Z Datsuns with the 1300 Escort. Everybody said it's impossible, you'll never achieve that. And I think the challenge was just so great that I actually took it on, and we went and built a 1300 Escort, 1983. And
was Richie there then?
Richie was still around at that time. I actually don't remember racing out, but the big challenge was Colin in the 140Z, and raced him on numerous occasions. In fact, won a few races against him in East London. And what happened that year was Henny van der Linde was racing the Stanza, and as they were scoring points in the classes, Colin was his biggest threat. So when we were about to go to Lichtenberg, Henny came to me and he said to me, "Bring me the cylinder head of that car of yours." So of course I took it off and whipped it down to him and did whatever, and he said to me, "Put it back, do this, do that, and take it to the dyno at Necker and Lorraine and all the rest." And that we went and raced at Lichtenberg, and we achieved success there. So it was, I think we gained some recognition in terms of respect from van der Linde and my fellow competitors. So cut a hell of a long story short, so we kind of helped the van der Lindes in terms of their quest to achieve their goals that year. And interesting that same year, 1983, Mike O'Sullivan was in the UK having that Rover built by, the name slips me out of my mind. But pardon?
David Price Racing.
There you go. And he came back, and he was in a dealership, and he had approached Westbank for sponsorship, and Westbank said, "No, guys, we're not interested in a one car, we'd look at your series." Because they had a corner, they sponsored, they had the corner of the car along. So, as it turned out, at that stage, I was on the committee with Cook. It was O'Sullivan and myself, and we went to Westbank's offices in Braamfontein, and we sat there. We were putting this deal on the table, and we walked up with 50,000 Rand for the series. And I remember getting into the lift, and we looked at each other. Shit, guys, we got a shit us full of money. What are we going to do with all this money? So that was the get-go of Westbank in our series. And as you know, I think they stuck with us for about 26 years. And in that 26 years, I think I sat on that committee for most probably 24 years, in sort of on and off in different kind of, holding different kind of portfolio and position. But yeah, It was 83. I moved into racing 1600 Escorts. I bought a car from Pat Ducken, which is the car that actually ended up being rolled down in Cape Town. I think there's a series of photographs down there, and I eventually ended up with an RS 2000 that Cook had rolled, Brian Cook had rolled, and I rebuilt that car and raced that car. So I'm just briefly covering kind of the cars that have been in my life and how we came about having them. The RS was the Pinto engine, and I certainly didn't have as much anywhere near the kind of success that my esteemed colleague over there has had. The Kellys was the Conrads in the Pinto. They were like a piece of blow rot, and we always ended up banging pistons against the cylinder head. I went on a mission to try and find a Mercedes rod, but at that stage, you know, the development of those engines was kind of wonderful. I know that's bad. I spent a number of days in the engineering shop of a guy by the name of Torino Tricani, had triple engineering, going through all the Merc rods, and as much as we tried, eventually I decided that the time was right to cross the floor. So, and with a little bit of encouragement from Van der Linde, I ended up with the Stanza, which was a far more successful car for me. No inference there, Jacques, in terms of the Pinto, but the Stanza was a very, very successful car for me. And I raced the Stanza for a couple of seasons and actually achieved a number of successes. And then we go to the years of the Skyline, but before that I bought a Mazda RX 765. I bought 321 from my esteemed colleague, Mr. Hepburn. I can honestly say that I think it was a car that maybe I didn't have the mechanical sympathy for it that I maybe should have had. So it wasn't a car that I raced too long. But I must say that in the time that I raced the Mazda, Willie was racing the record. There was the Dick Sorensen Skyline, and there was the Gary Dunkley Porsche, and Tim Wilcott, who was the marketing director of the two brothers and the father of Sabat at the time. For whatever reason, he decided to approach me, and I became part of most probably what was one of the strongest racing teams in this country, which was the Sabat racing team, and we raced for a number of years as the Sabat racing team. And I can honestly say that I think there's, to this day, I don't believe that there's ever been a greater unity amongst the team of such diversified cars and drivers in this country. You just will never ever see it again. You know, I think when you look at sponsors, they identify a brand, and that's how they identify this. We were just a bunch of guys from a record and the animal to Skyline to Porsche to my RX, and then they even made the mistake of they even brought on a Peter Lance with his golf. So that was a hell of a formidable team. So that was the late Tim Walcott, and we'll obviously remember him well. And then at that stage, I then moved across to, I bought a 2.8 Skyline from a guy by the name of Brian Bezuidenhout. And Willie and I ended up in one of the most horrendous crashes at Kyle Army, I think, certainly for me, in June 1987. The record had blown up its diff, and unfortunately I was the first car to arrive in the mine shaft there. The Skyline went in backwards, and eventually came out looking like an Hrsa, and we're not joking. So unfortunately we ended up binning two of the team cars, and I think we nearly ended up binning two of the team drivers at that stage. I ended up spending a couple of weeks, a couple of days in hospital. And you know, it's an amazing thing when you really are anal, you think to yourself, no, sure, I'm not going to be doing this for a while. But as soon as you start getting there, you think, okay. It was one race, and eventually I was back. And, so that was the start of that. I then ended up buying a Nissan L28 four-door, which had been converted to a two-door. Okay, this was kind of an interesting area in our time, because then we took on the likes of Gearmax and the new era Skyline of Nico van Rensburg, and then eventually it went to Johan Coetzee, and those were the heydays of Johan and my racing. We go to 1993, and the start of the season, Johan had got dispensation to run the new era Skyline, which was the old, which was actually the overhead cam engine with the 4 valves, but the car had been in the hands of Nico van Rensburg, and he just could never ever get the thing to be reliable. The L28 engine was the piece to have, and Johan had bought the car from Nico, and he had really, I mean, Johan's a fine engineer and a damn good driver, and he got it to the point where it was really giving us a hard time. So I looked at my options, and there was a blown up engine in Cape Town that was brought in by a guy by the name of Luigi Mazzocca, and he had brought in an L28 that had been built by a company by the name of Electromotive. And I heard that this engine was lying down there, but it was all blown up in pieces. And I made some inquiries in a box. Eventually I ended up getting a box of bits. When I looked at the head, it was the most beautiful, because it was a work of art. The camshaft was obviously still in the head, and the valves and all the rest of it. The bottom end was blown up, and the pistons were in a shocking state. The block was not the best, and eventually I spoke to the guys in the United States. I spoke to Nismo over there. Got onto a guy, and I told him exactly what the engine was, and he said, well, they don't do Venolia pistons anymore, we do Cosy pistons, don't do those rods. Anyway, eventually I just decided I would just do this trek to the US, and I went across there and spoke to these guys, and I got all these groceries for this engine, and brought it through as hand luggage. I guess I wouldn't have stood a chance today. I mean, we're talking about 9/11 today, with respect, and this was prior to that. Even then, I was actually stopped and quizzed at every airport that I brought these bits back. And to cut a hell of a long story short, I put that engine together in my garage, and I don't know if you guys have ever put something together, and as soon as you fire it up, you just actually know this is a good piece. And I fired that mother up, and I think if I hadn't had ears, the smile would have gone right around my face. So I couldn't wait to get this bastard up, and it was actually it was Demon. That was in 1993, and as it turned out, I wheeled the car out, a little bit of an unknown for my opposition, which was then basically Johan and Gary. And as it turned out, in 1993, the way the championship was scored is you were scored on the road. You weren't scored in terms of class. So there was, I speak under correction, I think it might have been 25 points on the table. So if you finished first, you got 25, and if you finished 10th, you got 15. So we were racing Class B cars against the Class A cars, and I think there were 5 at that stage. You know, be that as it may. So the Skyline was that competitive, and it was that reliable that by mid-season, we were leading the championship on an overall basis. In other words, we actually usurped the factories, and we were leading the championship overall. It's just the reliability and how competitive the car was. It's amazing how things turn when you got a bit of success going your way. Because I remember Peter de Waal phoning me, and I'd always like battled to get into Nissan, because they had their preferred driver at that stage. And he phoned me and he said to me, if there's anything we can help you with, and they were bringing in all sorts of good stuff for those guys. I mean, we were running Cooper Ring special head gaskets, and I was actually almost like offended by the fact that it took the kind of effort that I'd thrown at this thing to get some help from these buggers, you know. And I accepted it graciously at the time, but as it turned out, midway in 1993, I was sitting at a business conference in Germany, and I got a call from Tim Walcott of Saban, and he said, "I've got to talk to you about something. I'm sorry to be disturbing you." And he said, "We've just been offered the third Audi, which was there were the two Rothmans Audis and the S2 Audi, which was then the Minolta car." And he said, "They're making an offer to us that is, we buy the car, we own it, and they help us to run it." And he said, it's one of those sort of no-brainers. And I was over there, and it was like sort of pinch me kind of stuff. In retrospect, maybe we should have pursued the year in terms of the championship, but as it turned out, the excitement of the possibility of owning one of probably the most awesome cars, racing saloon car racing cars the world has ever seen, was just too overwhelming. And the kind of offer that they put on the table was, they actually they wanted to give it to us. They wanted to give us the car. So I said to Tim, I said, "How do you feel about it?" And he said, "Well, let's do this." I said, "Okay." Based on that, I said, let's go ahead. So we ended up mid-year 1993 taking the Trans Am Audi, which was the Minolta car, which was TA44, which was the car that actually won the Trans Am series. So the intrinsic value in the car was immense, and to say that it was an awesome car to drive is to be understating it. It was the most amazing piece of machinery I've ever thrown my ass into. We raced that year against the legends, obviously, the likes of the world. We raced against Sorrel, raced against Ben, the Duxbury guys like that, George Hrsa, and our problem was that we sat in the hands of Volkswagen at the time, and Volkswagen had the two Rothmans cars, which were primarily put there and only afterwards I realized why they'd actually come to us. First of all, they wanted the Skyline out of the equation. It was starting to become a source of embarrassment. And secondly, that they wanted somebody to campaign the third Audi that would actually be beholden unto them. So they were doing all the engine mapping. Although it was pretty simple at that stage, it was a Bosch MP12, and if you ask me what that means, I don't know. But in any case, we were always beholden unto them because they programmed the car for every single track that we went to. And as soon as they saw that we were getting a little bit competitive, and I'll give you a couple of examples. At East London, I split Terry and Chris Aberdeen, and there was an absolute moan that came from Chris, and Mike Barnard came to me and he said to me, no, hold on a second, the atmosphere is changing today, and all that bullshit. Bring me the EPROM, the chip. It was all cuck anyway. So, yeah, but the fact that we raced in that team was quite a pleasure and a privilege, and in fact what had happened that year, we actually ended up at Kyalami finishing 1, 2, 3 in terms of the Audis, which was the most significant positioning race outcome that Audi had post World War II. So we went down to PE and Mursa Party and all the rest of it. But it really didn't change our position in terms of where we are in terms of beholden unto Volkswagen. Unfortunately, at that stage, we were going into 1994, and that was really where, effectively, we were in manufacturer's challenge, and things were a little bit shaky because obviously the costs were spiraling, and we were kind of looking to the national championship was looking elsewhere, and that was when the manufacturer's challenges we knew it then fell by the wayside. And we went into 1995 with a totally new formula, and that was all V8 racing. Willie built, I think his initial build was about 4 or 5 Opel records. We had Sierras coming, we had effectively, but it didn't take long for the V8 formula to get going. Sadly, we had lost the Audis and those cars that were pretty much icons of it. So 1995, the V8 formula as we know it, and it's been a progression from there to where we are today. But it's something quite interesting, in fact. In 1996, I ended up going to, 1993 I went to Zimbabwe, and we raced it. We raced the Audi up there, and it was one of those race meetings that they had some of their local sports cars. We raced tin tops with sports cars. Shall we say that? as it turned out, that was competitive. That it actually, I believe it still holds the lap record up there at Donington today. And following on to that, we ended up going to Zimbabwe on a number of different following years. Where I'm leading to is that we ended up going to Zimbabwe in 1996, and we went up there with one of the V8s, and as it turned out, the company Fuchs, which is actually a lubricants company, this is my punt for tonight, and they into their mining lubricants, they were up there, and the managing director and the marketing director, who based down in South Africa, they ended up at the motorsports bar that night, a bar called Sable. Some of you guys will know it. I'm sure you will. Anyway, so we ended up meeting them, and they ended up coming out to the circuit. So they liked what they saw, and they said, we'd like to talk to you. So I said, well, with pleasure. And we're actually, that's 1996, so we're into 17, 18 years, and we ended up doing a sponsorship deal, and I think it epitomizes being at the right time at the right place, okay? And they liked what they saw. We ended up doing a deal with them. Fuchs is still our sponsor today. As you may or may not know, the V8 formula has, it's gone through some transformation, we all got some transformation. We're currently still racing in the V8 formula. I think this year, 2012, 2013, we threw our lot in with the Shelbys. It's provided some very interesting racing. You know, they've upped their game. They've put some seriously aerodynamic stuff on the cars, and we've seen how it's impacted on them. In fact, I think racing against us has also actually brought out the best in them, because we've seen their times come down by in some cases 1 and 2 seconds a lap. So provided some interesting racing, and that's where we are current days in terms of our racing. As we stand right now, Fuchs runs three cars in the formula, and hopefully they'll still be there for us for next year. And do I intend giving up? No, I'll go by example, and if my fellow competitor runs the Italian. But I think there's a couple of things. There's a couple of points that I'd like to just make in sort of kind of wrapping up. If you remember Formula Ford had a driver to Europe winner. Okay? And I think that was the greatest thing for South Africa. It actually brought some value to racing in this country. Okay? I see today that we've got Scirocco, we've got the little Van der Linde and Pepper racing. Outside of that, I don't believe there's too much more to be gained in terms of motorsport. And people have to get the mindset right that motorsport is, you've got to understand, you must enjoy this thing, because there's not too much reward. I'm one of those fortunate people who was in the right place, but I was leading to in the right place at the right time, and I still currently have a sponsor who kind of covers what I pays me to do what I love. So the thing is this, that get out there and enjoy your motorsport. You know, that's the concept here. Understand that's the most important. What your reward should be at the end of the day. Hey, I had a lacquer race alongside this guy next to me. We diced each other. Because guys, understand something, and ladies, if you take everybody away and you go around the circuit on your own, you'll be first, second, third, and last, and you'll get the trophy. But you also get the booby prize. You need your fellow competitor. Make sure that they're there. Make sure that you encourage them. Thanks very much.